Hello and welcome to the Accounting Apps podcast. My name is Heather Smith and today's recording is direct from the Tropical Innovation Festival in Cairns. I'm speaking with Marc Orchard, CEO of Planet Startup. Marc shares insights into the dynamic world of high-growth tech companies and his unique role as a fractional CFO. Marc highlights the importance of having a strong relationship between accounting bodies and innovation events and believes such events offer understanding of upcoming trends and are valuable opportunities for business development and client acquisition, even those not specifically targeting the tech startups. Hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us on the Accounting Apps podcast. Can you share with our listeners who you are and where you're from?
Hey everybody, my name is Marc Orchard. I am the CEO of Planet Startup, which is a CFO studio for high-growth tech companies. We work with accountants, bookkeepers, and all kinds of finance professionals to help startups to scale, launch, scale, and grow.
Thank you. We're here at the Tropical Innovation Festival. How have you been finding it, Marc?
I love these types of events. In particular, I love the dynamic conversations that happen outside of the events, Heather. So, all the content's been great, but the conversations have been even better. And I think that talking to a number of founders, it's complex getting funding in 2024, and so having real-time feedback in regards to where their businesses are at, what they can do to improve, and then ultimately what they want to do to succeed. That's been my favourite part of the conference over the last 3 days.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an inspirational,
it is.
Inspirational opportunity to connect with people and just have mind-blowing conversations. You seem to be the only fractional CFO here. Maybe you know of others, but I've not spotted any. Does that surprise you? And should more accountants and bookkeepers be coming to these conferences?
Yep. So the short answer is yes, although I'm mindful that for a lot of accountants and for bookkeepers, early stage high growth tech companies are a difficult client at times. So they often are under-resourced, they don't have a huge capacity to pay for support, but they have complex needs, which means that oftentimes strategically they need a lot of support. And so I completely understand why for a lot of accountants and bookkeepers they tend to wait for those types of companies to be at least in revenue, like post-launch doing revenue and potentially post a fundraise. But one of the things that before I was doing this role, I worked as the director of startups at the accounting firm BDO, and one of the things that we used to preach there is that high growth companies are a bit like a portfolio approach, where you never know which companies are going to take off. And so there needs to be at least some exposure to those early stage high growth companies, because they always go with the people that they trust or the people who've taught them things. And so I think conferences like this give accountants and bookkeepers a great way to have a one-to-many or a one-to-few type conversations, which long-term seeds possible relationships for business in the future. That's kind of how I approach it.
Absolutely. And you have been a steady relationship in the industry for probably, I'm thinking 15 years probably, I've known of you.
Bless. I feel like with the amount of grey hair that I've got now, Heather, that's pretty close. But no, look, from an accounting point of view, originally I was a financial planner. So I had a financial planning firm which I sold back in 2015, and due to a restraint of trade, couldn't continue in financial planning for a period when I sold my practice. And I had a number of my clients who are looking at investing in tech companies, and that's where I first started. So realistically, I've been in the industry, I guess, in some way, shape or form for the last probably 8 or 9 years. But it's only really been the last 4 or 5 where I've been specifically working with accounting companies. And the thing I love about accountants is that we can see the matrix, being able to see the numbers, or put another way.
This is what makes us cool, isn't it? We can see the matrix.
That's it. Well, it's a bit like when you watch Grey's Anatomy and the doctors throw up an X-ray, and for us lay folk, we're looking at being like, what does it say? And if you have a doctor that's like, oh, that looks bad, right? It's one of those things where I think I've fallen out of love in watching aspirational founders tell their narrative without seeing the numbers behind the scenes, because I've seen a number of founders who have been given a platform, when you look at the numbers behind the scenes, is semi-catastrophic, and I've seen some really under the radar founders who you may not even know are actually running a business, and you look at their numbers and you go, oh my gosh, that's an amazing company. And so I've started to really appreciate that I don't have an opinion on a company or a founder until I actually get to see their numbers. And from there, we get to obviously put a strategy around that, right? So I do think that accountants and bookkeepers have a unique insight and value add to founders. The hard thing is just giving it, if I'm honest. We love numbers and spreadsheets, and they love visuals. And so being able to translate those things across sometimes is the hard work.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true, in that as accountants and bookkeepers, the people who look wealthy typically aren't, and the people who don't necessarily look wealthy have extraordinary freedom, financial freedom. We have a lot of accountants and bookkeepers listening into this, and they may be interested, and I'm seeing a lot of people frustrated with compliance work at the moment and looking to move into that fractional CFO, virtual CFO, interim CFO space. What steps do you think that they should take to become your competitor?
Yep, got you. Encouraging competitors. Let's lift all the boats here, Heather. So one of the things that we find... So I do a whole heap of mentoring for other finance professionals. We find there's two pathways in. The first is through a traditional accounting role, so through the Big Four or through private practice. And typically we find that those types of professionals are exceptionally good with financial hygiene, exceptionally good with keeping compliance up to date, and very much thoughtful around making sure that numbers are appropriate for the stage. What they don't do particularly well is having a commercial opinion. They don't love, or they've never been incentivized, or they've never been able to actually express what they think the business should do. And so oftentimes they lack or are reserved in providing commercial input. They just want to give the facts. Whereas we also then have investment bankers or people who come from a more traditional finance background who come in and are much better at telling the story, much better about helping founders to fundraise, but typically find it really difficult to get on top of the financial hygiene and being able to produce reports to come up with the data or the analytics, because they're used to having an analyst or someone else doing that for them. And so if I was in an accountant or a bookkeeper's shoes and I was looking, I want more high value work, I want to have a high touch relationship with my customer or my clients, I think that I can provide more value. The two things is I think that you need to have a 6 to 12 or 12 to 18 month plan where you co-design that offering with some of your best clients and build up that commercial capability of spending time, even if it's just, this is what I would do if I was in that CEO's position, and then seeing how that plays out over a period. Great thing about startups is everything moves quick, but being able to have some reps of that commercial application of our financial acumen. And then second of all is that we work with 6 boxes of finance for us with our fractional work, and compliance is only one. So we do a lot of work understanding what the founder's success looks like in their personal financial situation, how that overlays over the business. There's the operational finance, there's the investing and fundraising, there's the commercial decision making, the strategy and governance when it comes to boards and management there, and then lastly is that performance piece we were talking about today. And so for me, it's an upskilling and capability where you're translating the numbers with the intention of increasing performance or providing better commercial outcomes. And if that's something that is of interest, that's awesome. What I do find is accountants sometimes want to charge more money. They see that as a potential option, but they just get stuck not knowing or not feeling comfortable with being able to actually translate their insights into actionable commercial decision-making or advice. That's the big hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, you have nailed that. Oh, you so nailed that. That's exactly the stumble. And it's such it's not simple, but it's such a clear stumble in that they've got all of this information. And I'm like, but you know so much. But they don't necessarily want to help them make the decision, but surface all the information. And with that, you have a decision there. And work through that process.
And that lead finance role is a complex one. You don't have full say, so you have to obviously, you're the confidant or the advisor to the CEO or to the founder, but there's a lot of reputational risk in if you make the wrong call, if you think you can trade through a difficult situation and you can't, then oftentimes that puts everybody in a financially vulnerable situation, or vice versa. If you decide to recommend that we should wrap the business up or not go ahead with this investment, or there's real commercial outcomes, good or bad, with any decision, right? And so that's where that risk tolerance is probably something where I find a lot of accountants struggle, because typically their personal risk tolerance is different to the business's risk tolerance, and being able to divorce those two and say, if I was in their shoes personally, I would make that decision because that's what I would do.
Yeah.
But if I was in their shoes and I had to make it based on the risk tolerance of the business, this is the most pragmatic outcome, like being able to differentiate between how you feel uncomfortable but the business is still in their sweet spot of risk. That's half the battle.
Yeah. No, that is just such great advice. I don't know how they build up their risk tolerance, but that's something that I guess you get with experience and wisdom, and you keep sort of plugging away at it. And I know that we heard from Vu Tran, who was the co-founder of Go One, a sort of a unicorn company for people who don't know, and he was talking about how he's a migrant child, and how migrants are such risk takers that they came here, and entrepreneurs again are such risk takers. But it's not necessarily in our DNA that of people who are attracted to the accounting industry. So.
Yep, that's very true. And to be fair, to your point, the only way I've seen professional service advisors increase their capacity with that risk tolerance is exposure. It's like reps. It's like being able to have like secondments into a company that already has like a financial leader who you can then see and model, like what are you making, what are you seeing that information from, and what's your benchmarks for risk, both high and low, and then starting to use that insight to create your own version. But like the hard thing is you can't just look, accountants and bookkeepers super time strapped. Our revenue streams are typically tied to time, which means we don't have a huge capacity to just be we're going to write off 10 hours this week doing some additional research or doing some forming relationships and observing other people doing finance work, right?
Yeah.
But what I would say is that then don't go into the fractional space. Just do what you do exceptionally well.
Yeah.
But if that's something that on the reason we went into fractional CFO work was for three reasons. One, we had a big impact on the outcomes. Like we go from being the external advisor to being the internal cheerleader. The second is that we, just being honest, we can charge a lot more for fractional work. So most startups in that pre-Series A phase would struggle to spend more than $1,000 a month on their accountant because that's their benchmark.
Yep.
Whereas we easily compare ourselves to a full-time resource, which means that if we're charging less than $90,000 to $300,000 a year, then they're getting a gap of arbitrage, and so $3,000 to $5,000 a month engagements are pretty regular. But then, lastly, and most importantly, is that I think that being the trusted advisor means different things to different professionals, but there's no more trust than when the CEO needs to make a big call and you're talking to them daily or weekly about what that looks like for them. That's where we feel our team makes our best decisions, right? It's emotional management as much as it is financial management. That's some of my thoughts there.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, our audience also are accounting technology lovers. Is there
Excellent. Excellent.
Is there any piece of accounting tech that you really like at the moment?
So, a couple of things. One, we are in the thick of it with Xero. Ultimately, we try and get that to be our source of truth for the majority of our clients. Some of our clients are moving up into bigger solutions like NetSuite, but for most of our clients, Xero is amazing. One of the things we're looking into a lot at the moment is dashboarding tools, in particular being able to give visual representation to the numbers quickly at scale. And we're looking at a couple of different providers at the moment for our internal stuff, but we're also looking at Power BI and actually building our own custom dashboards as a piece of IP. And then probably lastly, I don't know, this is embarrassing because I'm on a podcast. I'm supposed to be giving you a recommendation. But there's this really cool startup. I can't remember its name. We'll come back to you on it. But it's about treasury management. So one of the things I found, a lot of startups at the moment are trying to put all their capital across multiple providers and having some treasury considerations. But because of things like Silicon Valley Bank last year, semi going into default and so forth, they're looking for diversification of risk. And that's hard when you've got multiple providers. So this treasury management software that I had the chance to play around with brings it all into one place, and you can see all your money in all your different jurisdictions at one spot. That is an absolute godsend for anybody doing internal finance. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that tech with us, and I'll chase you up for the name of it. But,
that would be great.
I'm not sure of the name either. So I have a controversial question for you.
Yes.
Which you can completely disagree with just because I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Do you think the Chartered Accountants, Australia, New Zealand, should come in and sponsor an event like this, like an innovation event? Should they be part of it? Should they be encouraging their members to attend?
So I have multi-layered answers to that question, and the short answer is yes, for sure. Like, there should be a much stronger relationship between some of the accounting bodies in situations like this, if nothing else, because if I was in, like, CA, ANZ shoes, I'd want to know what's coming. Like, we've spoken a lot around disruptive tech over the last 3 days, particularly in professional services and AI. And it's clear that the workforce of the future are going to be tech-enabled, most likely AI-enabled. If I was in strategy, I'd be wanting proximity to all these up-and-coming ideas and so forth, so I knew what was coming. But from an actual member point of view, I'm mindful that the most important thing when you're doing investment as a accountant or bookkeeper is to try and make sure that you're tying business development activity to potential client acquisition. And I'm mindful that not everybody in your listeners would be necessarily looking for tech startups as their clients. But I think the unique thing about this particular type of event is that you can build a reputation really quickly because people, like, everything's word of mouth in this space, and not everybody here is working on a tech startup. So there's been quite a few professional service firms like us. There's been, like, lawyers. There's been like a ton of service providers, I guess specifically for tech-enabled innovation companies here. And so it's actually quite a great place to probably look at 40% high-growth companies, like 30% service-based businesses, and 30% adjacently interested. I think there's a ton of potential here. My only caveat to that is that if the accountants are looking to put up a booth and to be able to give out paraphernalia, like, that doesn't go well in our space. It's all about relationship, right? And so I would love to see more from CA doing more broadly across the startup ecosystem. I know they've done things working with some of the co-working spaces like Fishburners, but one of the things that what I love is there to be almost a reverse mentoring opportunity where they actually bring the startups across into the accounting firms and say, hey, if you guys were thinking about innovating, if we were doing a hackathon and you were going to break our industry, if you're going to break accounting, what would you do? Like, what are all the risk factors we could consider? I actually think that would be a lot of fun too.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you, and I do think that the overarching theme of the conference is relationships, and it's that opportunity to have in-person relationships that it's not vendor booth. No one's actually selling. No one is trying to pitch. Even though there's heaps and heaps of pitches happening, no one's trying to sell you anything. So that is that lovely concept of it. It's kind of hard to describe because it's just so amazing, and so many people that you meet. You know everyone's going to be incredible in their own different way.
Yes, that's true. I've not been bored, and I have met so many aspirational people where you go, my God. And even just the stories, Heather. Like, realistically, the great thing about an event like Tropical Innovation Festival is that, like, there's just a bit more time. Like, there's 4 or 5 days here holistically. There's, like, a ton of events, but everyone's spending time to get to know each other, and that's unique. And so I find that particularly attractive here.
And there are, as far as I can tell, 4 accountants here, and many of them have online, their practice is online, so they're attending the events and interactions and the networking that they want to attend, and then they're going and working in their room for a few hours to catch up. So they're not completely behind. It's not a complete week it's not a complete week loss. It's a week innovation and your own business development session. But thank you so much for joining us on the Accounting Apps podcast. Mark, how can people get in contact with you?
Yep, got you. Best way to find me, if you'd like to reach me directly, I'm under Marc Orchard on LinkedIn, so linkedin.com/Marc Orchard, or you can hit me up at mark@planetstartup.com.au.
Awesome. Thank you.
Conversation, wasn't it? The treasury management software solution that Mark mentioned was called Primary. Its tagline is powering smart, secure and transparent treasury management. And you can find it at www.primary.so. I encourage you to keep up to date with the modern accounting technology landscape by subscribing to the Accounting Apps podcast, the Accounting Apps newsletter, and join the conversations happening in the Accounting Apps mastermind community. I'm your host, Heather Smith, and I'm pretty easy to find on all social media platforms. I look forward to connecting with you, and if you haven't done it already, click subscribe to the podcast. Cheers.